1. Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Yaron Brook Show, and today we're running an experiment. We're streaming the show, not just on Blog Talk Radio, where many of you, I think, are listening, but we're also streaming the show on live, on YouTube, on Periscope, and on Facebook Live. On Facebook Live, let's not forget that. So, welcome to all of you. Some of you might not be familiar with this show. Some of you might not be familiar with me. You might be just encountering this on whatever social media app you happen to have. Now, this is also on Blog Talk Radio. If you go to Blog Talk Radio, Yaron Brook, you'll get audio only. Everywhere else, you're getting both audio and video. So cool. I can see your chats. Theoretically, I should be able to see posts on, let me just set this up, on YouTube as well. So if you want, what do I have to do here? I have no idea. All right, hopefully this will work. So I should be able to see your posts on YouTube as well. So test me, put up some posts on YouTube. So we can see. A big part of this is for me to see if I can do live events on this, and if we can actually do some Q&As live on multiple platforms all at once. That would be kind of cool. Feel free to ask questions on the Facebook Live or on the YouTube Live. I see yes. I am getting comments on YouTube, so I have access to that as well. Now, I was joking today because I've got dashboards all over my screen and no place to put any of my contact. I can see your Facebook comments. Unfortunately, they show up on Facebook. They don't show up with YouTube and with everything else. I've got three comment places because I got Blog Talk comments, I've got Facebook comments, I've got YouTube comments. We've got two cameras going, so you're getting two different angles. Hopefully that'll make it a little bit interesting. I think they're switching. Yeah, they seem to be switching. That's good. What else is going on? I got comments all over the place. I've got to manage the Blog Talk stuff. I've got to manage the Facebook stuff. I've got to manage this new software. So this is really, really cool software. The software basically streams it to the cloud, and then in the cloud, the stream gets split up into a Periscope, a YouTube feed, and a Facebook feed. So my bandwidth at home basically only has to deal with two things: video and audio, and the multiple streams happen in the cloud. So I love technology. This is so cool. I had a couple of video guys, paid them a lot of money, come in today and set this all up for me, because I hate setting this stuff up by myself and try to read manuals and figure out what the hell is going on. So this is pretty cool. I think we've got Skylight C on YouTube watching this. We've got some guy named Ronald. I don't know Ronald, who joined on Periscope, and then we've got a bunch of people. We've got like 40 people on Facebook Live. We've got 11 people. That's a low number on Blog Talk Radio. So I guess some of you are not doing Blog Talk, are doing these other mediums instead. All right. So the show today is going to be a little confusing. Like the video on Facebook, I've got all these things flying around. Every time you like something, some emoji goes flying off the screen, and that's distracting. But don't stop loving the show. That's good. Go and invite followers. Invite followers on YouTube. Invite followers on Facebook. Invite your friends on whatever. What am I missing? Twitter, and we've got, of course, Periscope. Periscope and Twitter, I guess, are joined at the hip, so they go together. If you go to YouTube to see YouTube Live, what you can do is just go to my channel on YouTube. So Yaron Brook channel, and it should be the #1 video broadcasting on the YouTube channel. So thank you, everybody, for participating in this experiment. That we're trying out something new. For those of you listening by podcast, and of course, all of you can listen to this also on a podcast. You can download it anytime. And I'm going to do the Blaze this way as well. And the advantage with the podcast, of course, is we take out all the commercials and you get the clean audio. The show today doesn't have commercials. My Objectivist Living, I do 2 shows. I do an Objectivist Living show, which is this show that has no commercials, and then I have the Blaze, which runs its own commercials that are sometimes pretty funny, given the content of my shows. Let's see. All right, we got Tatiana from Colombia. She's listening. You guys should invite me back. I'll come back to Colombia. What software is it? Somebody's asking what software is it. I don't know. Don't ask me. Oh, Restream. So look up Restream, and then you download this piece of software called OBS onto the computer, and it works both on Mac and PC. I've got a Mac. I think it's actually some of the features are more enhanced for the PC, so they're still catching up on the other stuff. So cool. All right, I feel like a pilot with like 500 different buttons that I could press. And again, I apologize for the podcasters who are not interested in any of this. They're just jogging along and want to hear the show. And here I am delving into all the technicalities and everything. But, it's cool. Hopefully you're getting a little piece of my enthusiasm here on how cool all this is. Let me close some windows that I don't need so I can focus in on the stuff that I actually do need. Let me know if I chat or whatever. If there's any sound problems. Now, my internet still is spotty. I'm a little worried about it. So it seems to drop once in a while. It seems to like go on little vacations and just not work for a little while. So hopefully we'll be able to go an hour and a half without any problems on the internet. Saturday, I'm having some technician come in and upgrade my internet setup here so I can have, perfect internet as well. So, all right, you're liking the multiple camera angles? We got 2. I could connect more cameras, so that might be in the cards. We might add a 3rd camera just to kind of make it interesting. If you think that would be good. Invite your friends to join us on Periscope. I don't know how to do that. I have no idea how to do that. All I know is Twitter. I guess Twitter and Periscope are somehow connected, but go ahead and invite your friends, YouTube as well. And the goal here is really to add some programming. What I'd like to start doing is periodically do a live YouTube event or a live event on all these platforms where I only just answer your questions. I don't prepare anything, and we set this all up, and we have all the comments ready, and I basically just answer questions. And so that's my goal of where I want to head. I'm hoping to do the first one of those soon. Let me know what you think of the setup. Let me know what you think of the camera angles. Does this look good? Do I look good? I don't know. I'm kind of scruffy today. I just came back from physical therapy. So, lots of stuff, lots of moving parts, lots of things going on. I also don't know now kind of what my key statistic is going to be, in terms of how many people are listening, how many people, because so now I have to aggregate them all. So I'm going to have to create spreadsheets and stuff. So it's going to be interesting to kind of monitor everything and keep track of everything and get everything and monitor progress, in particular for the Blaze show, because they have awful statistics. They don't give me anything. So I'm going to Dallas next week to pound on the table and demand better stats. All right. Everybody cool? And, of course, you can call the show. Now, let me find the number. There it is. You can call the show, and please do. These shows are always better with your participation. It doesn't matter what platform you're watching this on. You can call. The number is 347-324-3075. 347-324-3075. And when you call, press 1 so that I know you want to ask a question, because I see all the people that are called in to listen to the show. So people can actually call in just to listen instead of kind of using the internet. But if you call in and you want to ask a question, you have to press 1, and then I get a little question mark, and then I know that you want to ask a question. So please do that, and that could be cool. Okay, so I'm not sure. All right, yeah, you don't want to be on multiple platforms, partially because that'll screw up my statistics, and partially because I'm not sure all the platforms have exactly the same timing. So, you know, I know, for example, Blog Talk is a little ahead of Facebook. I can see the Facebook feed, and it's a little behind. I'm not sure about YouTube and everything else. So you know, pick one, whatever it is you want to do. If you want to artificially enhance my stats, have all 4 open, just have 3 on mute. But that just artificially. You guys think I should switch to like 15-second camera thing? We can do that. I think we can do that on the fly. I'm not sure. Let's see. Anyway, again, apologizing to the... okay, we'll do that 15 seconds, and we'll make sure that's that. All right, we'll see if that works. I don't know. And what else? Okay, today I want to talk about Donald Trump's speech and the response to Donald Trump's speech. Now we've got a caller. I'm going to take the call, and then I want to talk about it. I really think the speech Donald Trump gave in Poland is his best speech, just in terms of rhetoric. It's well written. It has a lot of content. It's actually content rich. Usually speeches are content poor or content void. And the speech in Poland was actually a content rich speech. Raises a lot of interesting questions. I've seen some objectivists post kind of positive evaluations of the speech. I as you'll see, I'm not as positive as they are, but I've also seen the Wall Street Journal write a very positive op-ed about it. I've seen the left attack the speech violently, and I think that the left has it all wrong. So it's a very interesting speech because I think it really lays out a certain vision for America and the West, Western civilization, and then the left has laid out a certain vision. Kind of, not the wacky left. I'm not talking about the wacky left. I'm not talking about the haters. I'm talking about the kind of the better left, right? The Atlantic magazine left, who often write interesting things and interesting stories. And they have an analysis of the speech, which I think is interesting and wrong. And it presents another false alternative. And there's actually a National Review article that was very good in pointing out the flaws in the left article. And not a National Review. It was also an Atlantic by a National Review author. That lays out the flaws in the left argument, but also doesn't quite articulate the flaws in Trump's speech, although he clearly, I think, just by the way he talks about it, is clearly has a negative view of the way Trump approached it. So, yeah, I'm already getting the sneering comments on YouTube, I guess, that I've said something positive about Trump. I'm in an alternative universe. The speech is awful. The speech is really, really bad. Let's get this very clear. Philosophically, intellectually, the content of the speech is very bad, and we'll talk about why. But it's very interesting, and the speech is very well written. Of course, Trump didn't write it. He was using a teleprompter, and it was written by Stephen Miller. And you can tell it was written by Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is very close to Bannon. It was like Bannon wrote the speech, and we'll get kind of the Bannon-ish angle to the speech and what it represents. And the speech is about really Western civilization, and it's about the kind of certain elements in the right's approach to what Western civilization is. And again, it's got some really good one-liners. It's got some really good content
taken out of the context of the rest of the speech would sound fantastic. I mean, he's got content there that I've said. He's got stuff that I could have said, put it that way. I'm sure I've said about Western civilization. But you have to understand the speech in the context. So we're going to analyze the speech. I think it's important. I think it's interesting. And I think the left's response is revealing and important and interesting. And I think the right's response, like the Wall Street Journal, and it's interesting that the Wall Street Journal pick and chooses its quotes out of the speech, and the left picks its quotes out of the speech, each to advance their own agenda. And we're going to try to take a broader approach to the speech, and see what we come up with. And look, Stephen Miller, there's no question, is a smart guy, very smart, but he comes at it from a particular philosophical perspective. He comes at Western civilization from a particular perspective. He comes at America, what America means from a particular perspective, and it's a Stephen Bannon perspective, and I think it's a very, very bad perspective, which I disagree with, and we'll get to that. All right, before we get to all of that, we're gonna take a call. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
This is Russell Jones.
Hey, Russell, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So what's up?
My question is there actually a chance of saving Western civilization? Because from how I see it, the left is gonna collapse the economy under Trump, and when America falls, that's pretty much the end of Western civilization for how I see it.
So I don't know why the left is going to collapse the U.S. economy, because it's the right's in power, right? It's Republicans in the House and Senate and president. So it strikes me that the Republicans are going to collapse the economy if you think it's going to happen that quickly. But I agree with you. I think we're screwed. That is, I think Western civilization, and we'll talk about what Western civilization is, which is a key question. Western civilization is in deep, deep trouble. What Donald Trump said in his speech is that we're the fight of our lives, and Western civilization is in decline, and we better shape up. And all of that is true. He's got the enemy wrong, and he's got the problem wrong, but all of the identification is a true identification. And then the question is, given all that, is there any hope? And somebody actually asked me, maybe it was you, somebody asked me on Twitter the same thing today. And look, is there hope? Yeah, there's hope. It's slim. It's not a lot of hope. We have to be realistic here. And it's not a lot of hope. There's no hope in the short run. In the short run, we cannot be successful. We will not win. I don't know how to, I don't know how to articulate that. 10 years, 20 years is just not enough time. Western civilization is so diseased. It is so diseased right now. Left and right are so wrong, are so diseased, that the only alternative is a new enlightenment. The only alternative is to rediscover, reinvigorate, bring back into the fold of Western civilization the ideas of the Enlightenment. This is not about economics. This is not about having the right economic policy. This is not about politics. This is about bringing in the Enlightenment ideas culturally into the culture. Politics flows from culture. I agree with Steve Bannon on this, although it's not new to him. It's an old idea, and certainly Ayn Rand believed this way before anybody. So it's ideas, it's philosophy that shape culture, and culture then shapes politics. And to change a culture takes a long time. And I'm in this for the next 50 to 100 years. I am under no delusion that this is something that'll happen tomorrow, that's going to happen quickly, that, they can just... And I also don't believe, although many people want to suggest this, I also don't believe that that there's a silver bullet, that there's one thing. If only the Ayn Rand Institute did one thing, everything would be fantastic. Everything would be great, right? And I don't believe that, right? So it's, it's going to be really, really tough, and it's going to take a long, long time. And that's the reality. And you have to, as a human being living in this world, living in the world we live in today, what you have to do is create the best world you can around you, protect yourself from when real disaster happens, and do the best that you can, but don't live under the expectation. I think it would be very false of you to live under the expectation that it's gonna get better. It's suddenly out of nowhere going to get better, because it's just not. That's just not in the cards anytime soon, right? So I mean, you got to study the ideas. I think the ideas of objectivism, because it enhances your own life. It allows you to live the best life that you can live for you. I think you can engage in the battle of ideas, because the more minds you bring in, the more minds you change, the better the world in which we live in today is going to be. But in terms of sitting here and waiting and anticipating for the world to actually change, for us to get an objectivist president, for us to have laissez-faire capitalism, I mean, forget it. I mean, forget it in our lifetime. It just is not happening in our lifetime, and I think we just need to be realistic about that.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry to be pessimistic, but I think there's a lot to enjoy in life. I think there's a lot to live for, but to sit and expect politics to change, that's not going to happen. So what you have to do is make the best life that you can within the context of what exists today. And I think there's a lot one can do to do that. On top of that, I think the fight is worth fighting, because I think the fight is in itself enjoyable. It's enjoyable to fight for ideas you believe in. It's enjoyable to go out there and take it to the bastards and not let the bastards get away with what they're trying to get away with.
Right.
Make sense?
I got it.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Brook.
Well, I appreciate you calling. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening. And you, anybody listening out there, no matter what platform you are watching this or listening to this, you can call in. The number is 347-324-3075, 347-324-3075. And, I'm glad to see so many of you online on all the different platforms and engaged. You should all sign up. You should all subscribe to whatever platform you're on. So if you're on YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you're on Facebook, make sure to follow me on Facebook. If you're on Periscope, follow me on Twitter. If you're on Blog Talk Radio, you can follow me on Blog Talk Radio. That way you'll get reminders of when the next show is on. It'll just make future shows much more easy for you to engage in. Somebody says I look like Dr. Seuss. That's interesting. Do I look? I don't know how Dr. Seuss looks like. You mean one of his characters? Anyway. All right. So caller's barely audible. I can probably figure out a way to fix that, but I don't know that I can do it on the fly. Let me try something. I'm gonna raise that up. So let me know if that makes any difference. If that has raised my volume, hopefully it'll raise just the caller's volume and not all volume. But let us know. Well, we'll get all this set up. We should have all of this under control. So we should be able to control the volume of the different things separately. So actually, the callers. Anyway, I'll work on it. I'm not sure if what I just did will matter one iota. All right. What else? We were talking about Donald Trump. We were talking about Donald Trump and his speech in Poland. By the way, somebody's asking about Rubin Report. I will be on the Rubin Report again for those interested. I'm actually taping it at the end of this month. My expectation, he will broadcast it in early August. So my second appearance on the Rubin Report will be in early August. And I think we're going to get into some controversial issues of application on it. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what kind of questions he has for me this time. So here we are. All right. So as you know, Donald Trump was in Europe last week for the G20 meetings, and he chose Poland to visit Poland on his way to, I guess it was in Frankfurt, where the G20 meetings were held. And I don't know how many of you followed the G20 meetings, but they were interesting in many regards, partially because of how Donald Trump interacted with European leaders, but also because there were these riots outside. I don't know how much it was reported in the media, because I don't follow television and stuff like that. I have my own media sources, but there were these massive riots. I mean, the city was under siege. It was huge amounts of violence. Whole sections of the city were burnt, destroyed, looted. All those black-clad crazy, I forget what they call themselves. Maybe somebody in the chats will remind me. The crazy nuts leftists who dressed up as black, the anarchists. They all were there, and so it was. And they were just unbelievably destructive. It was amazingly destructive at the G20, and they were outdoors, burning and looting and destroying stuff. And it was Antifa they called themselves, Antifa. So and they were basically, being the nihilists that they are and destroying. And there was very little coverage of it, which was interesting. Again, leftist media doesn't like to cover the destruction that the left inflicts on all of us. But it was evident in Germany, and there's a lot of commissions now to figure out why the police didn't respond and why they didn't deal with it appropriately. And it's not just Muslims that the police in Germany are pathetic at dealing with. It's also these leftist groups, these anarchist, leftist, anti-Western civilization groups. So that was interesting. So the whole trip landed up being fascinating, and there's a reason that I think Donald Trump chose Poland for his to deliver his main speech during this trip. We'll get to that reason in a little while, but Poland is where he gave his big talk. He did some press conferences, he did some other things, but he gave a substantial talk in Poland, and it was quite interesting, and it basically, the theme of the talk was basically this: Western civilization is in deep trouble. And he talks about the fact that the continent, the Europe, no longer, this is quoting him, no longer confronts the specter of communism. But today we are in the West, and we have to say there are dire threats to our security and our way of life. Absolutely true, right? Oh, wait a minute. I've got the wrong note up. Let me just get it. Okay, there we go. That's better. That's not it either. Where do I have it? Okay, there we go. Okay, so he gives a speech about the real dangers, and here's some quotes, some of the quotes, and I'm going to pick and choose because we're not going to read the whole speech to you. Luckily for you. So here's the quote. We're confronted by another oppressive ideology. So he's talked about communism, he talked about Nazism, he talked about the bravery of the Poles in combating Nazism and combating communism. And then he says we're confronted by another oppressive ideology, one that seeks to export terrorism and extremism all over the globe. America and others have suffered one terror attack after another. We're going to get it to stop. Great, I'm with him so far. During an historic gathering in Saudi Arabia, I don't know, he just lost me with this historic gathering in Saudi Arabia, but we'll put that aside. I called on the leaders of more than 50 Muslim nations, right? The Muslim nations that are funding exactly the kind of terrorism and ideology that he was just talking about. I called on them, on 50 Muslim nations, to join together to drive out this menace which threatens all of humanity. It truly is a menace. Is it? What is really destroying Western civilization? We'll get to that. Is it the threat to Western civilization? We must stand united against these shared enemies to strip them of our territory and their funding and their networks and any form of ideological support that they may have. Good, right? While we will always welcome new citizens who share our values and love our people, Our borders will always be closed to terrorism and extremism of any kind. I'm a little generally worried when people say our borders will be closed to extremism of any kind, given that I am considered, I'm sure by Donald Trump and by many of you guys, I am considered an extremist myself. I worry about the government decided who's an extremist and who isn't, and banning me or banning my friends because they don't like our ideas. But if he's just talking about, there's terrorists, then I'm with him. Okay, you could, I could be generous, right? People always argue that I'm so ungenerous to Donald Trump. So I'm going to be generous. I'm going to say, okay, he means Islamia. He means jihadism. He means extreme Islamism or something like that, right? But extremism of any kind, I don't like that. I do not like, I don't want the government deciding what extremism means. Extremism is Ayn Rand actually has an essay on this. She called extremism an anti-concept because, you can be extreme in your defense of individual rights. You can be extreme in your defense of Sharia. You can be extreme in your interest in killing Americans. You can be extreme in defending the Constitution. What does extremism mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's an anti-concept. It's supposed to undercut our ability to be consistent, to be radical in the name of a good ideology. So I don't like the term. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And then he says, and this is great, guys. This is like the best, right? He said this before, but in this context, this is good. We are fighting hard against radical Islamic terrorism, and we will prevail. Again, I don't like him using radical. Radical is a good term associated with Islamic terrorism, but I like the fact that he's got Islamic terrorism in there. I mean, I would have just said, we're fighting hard against Islamic terrorism. That would be good. We're fighting against the ideology of jihadism or the ideology of Islamic totalitarianism or Islamism, however you want to phrase it. Good job. All right? So he has said, right, that we're confronted by an oppressive ideology, which I agree with, one that seeks to export terrorism and extremism around the world. I agree with. Him going to Saudi Arabia, weak, pathetic. I think it was awful and appeasement and really, really bad. But okay, I can buy that. And he identifies them as Islamic terrorism. Great. Obama never did that. Bush did it for 1 week in something like 2005 or 6, and then stopped doing it. Never used Islam in the context of terrorism. It's about time we had a president who did. Good for Donald Trump, right? The problem that I see is that he views this issue of Islam as the existential threat to the West. And I don't think it is. Now, I think it is if we, ignore them, if we just, don't do anything about the terrorism, don't do anything about fighting them ideologically, if we just do nothing, yeah. And Europe is in deep trouble because the number of Muslims who live in Europe and the fact that Europe has no conception and no idea about what civilization represents, what the West represents, who they are. So they're not a melting pot, right? So I'm all for immigration, but you have to be a melting pot. You have to have something that the immigrants are coming to, that you're going to integrate them into, that you're going to assimilate them into. And I, for one, do not believe that all Muslims are incapable of assimilating into Western civilization. I don't believe that for a minute. But you have to have a Western civilization for them to assimilate into. And it's true that Europe doesn't have that. It doesn't have a conception of what it is. It doesn't have an idea of what it represents. And it doesn't demand, it doesn't expect, it doesn't say, you have to become like us. You have to accept our values because, as we'll talk about later, it has no values because those values are being emptied out. The values are being rejected. Quite the contrary. Any value that one could associate with Western values, today the left and the Europeans are rejecting as values. They feel guilty about it. It's white guilt. It's Christian guilt. It's Western guilt. It's all the Christians deserve to feel guilty, but everybody else It's guilt, 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 and it's there are no Western values. They refuse to accept the idea that there's some such thing as Western values that people should, when they come to the West, accept and assimilate into. And we'll see examples of that in the left's critique of Donald Trump's speech, where they completely capitulate and fold when it comes to trying to understand what the West means and what Western values are and what they represent, right? All right, so Trump has identified, Islamic terrorism as a major problem, and it is, but it's not. And this is the problem I have with the rest of the speech and everything. It's not an existential problem. This is not the real problem to what we are. But if you understand the West correctly. So let's first see how Donald Trump understands the West. And then I think we can better understand the risks and the threat that he foresees. So let's look at what for Donald Trump, the West represents. All right, and I'm going to go through the speech. I'm going to skip some stuff, but basically try to hit on the points where I think this comes out. He says, we must work hard together to confront forces whether they come inside or out. He doesn't explain what the inside forces are. From the South or the East. Notice Southeast, that's the Middle East. East is Russia. That threaten over time to undermine these values and to erase the bonds of culture. And here's the key. Culture, faith, and tradition. Culture, faith, and tradition. This is a repeated theme. For him, the West is about culture, and we'll get to what that means for him, faith and tradition. That's what the West is. The West is not particular ideas. The West is not particular philosophies. The West is not a specific political view. The West is primarily culture, faith, and tradition. And this keeps coming back in a sense. He says we write symphonies. Love that. That's culture, right? We pursue innovation. I guess that's culture. We celebrate ancient heroes. Culture. Embrace our timeless traditions and customs. Do we? Do we really? Do we still do those public executions where we rip somebody's guts out of him? Because that was a Western practice, a custom, how we used to torture people. There are lots of timeless traditions and customs that we've, thank God, or thank reality, thank reason, we have abandoned. The custom of kissing the feet of the king, or assuming that the Pope was always right, or a million other customs and traditions that we have, thank goodness, abandoned. And always seek to explore and discover new frontiers, brand new frontiers. Good, right? So there's some good here. Culture, that's good. Timeless tradition and customs. I'm not big on tradition. Always explore and discover new brand. That's good. That's I agree. That's part of what the West means. We reward brilliance. We strive for excellence. Good stuff. And cherish inspiring works of art that honor God. That's kind of interesting. I just cherish inspired works of art. Why do you have to stick God in there? That honor God. Now remember, this was carefully crafted. This was a speechwriter by the name of Stephen Miller crafting the speech. Now, granted, the audience here is Polish and very Catholic and very religious. I don't know that I have some of the quotes that I don't think I have the quotes where he talks about God and John Paul coming there and everybody yelling, we want God and stuff like that. It's religion is a big part of this, and according to the speech, religion is a big part of what the West and what Western civilization represents. Tradition and faith. He keeps coming back to that, right? He even says in the speech, this is part of the good stuff, we treasure the rule of law and protect the right to free speech and free expression. I mean, kind of amazing coming from Donald Trump. Free speech and free expression. Not exactly a defender of free speech and free expression, but okay. We empower women as pillars of society and of our success. Good deal. But then, we put faith and family, right? Not government and bureaucracy at the center of our lives. And here's the dichotomy that he's creating, right? And that the left, you'll see in a minute, creates as well. Faith and family versus government and bureaucracy. the West being defined by its faith and the idea of family and the importance of those, versus the left being defined as a particular political system that is filled with bureaucracy. But there's nothing, faith and family are not what's the relationship between faith, family, government, and bureaucracy? They're not opposites. They're not on the same scale. They're different things, right? But, okay. Okay, so, he has a little section here where he's hinting at his pro-choice, pro-life stance on abortion, which plays very well in Poland. Again, Poland's a very Catholic country, so that plays very well in Poland. Finally, he says the fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. That's a great question. That's a great question, important question, right? Does the West have the will to survive? Now, you'll notice in a bit that the leftists question what is the West. They think this sentence, the fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. They think this is a horrific question. They go apoplectic around this question. Now, I think this is the right question to ask. I think Trump is ill-equipped to answer it. But it's the right issue to bring up. The fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. Do we have the confidence in our values to defend them at any cost? Now, I'd ask Trump, what are those values that need to be defended? Do we have enough respect for our citizens to protect our borders? There he sneaks in protection of borders. Part of the values of the West is not to have walls. It's not to have these horrific borders. But, okay, not as awful as it could be. Do we have the desire and the courage to persevere our civilization in the face of those who would subvert it? Okay, so this is really the key to everything. He says we can have the largest economies and the most lethal weapons anywhere on earth. Now, this is where he's quoting me. I've said this. We can have the largest economies, the most lethal weapons anywhere on earth. But if we do not have, this is not a quote, strong families and strong values, then we will be weak and will not survive. I usually, when I say this, don't include families, right? So you see family values. You see, when he says strong values, what does he mean? Okay, what does he mean by the West? What does he mean by the West's will to survive? Who is the West? What does the West represent? What are the values that the West represents? He says our own fight for the West does not begin on the battlefield. It begins with our minds, our wills. Wills is important, and our souls, right? That's not bad. Wills is a little too Nietzschean for my taste, but will is too emotional. But he's right? So here's this passionate, powerful speech, and it was good. It's as good as a delivery as Trump has had, and the speech itself reads well. It's punchy. I could deliver this speech and it would be, it would really get the audience going. And I think Trump did a fairly good job of getting the audience going. It's punchy. It's well written. So Stephen Miller, kudos to you. Good speech writing. But what at the end is it the Western values represent? What at the end of the day is Donald Trump talking about? Who is this West that we need a will in order to help survive? Who is this West that we need to shape our minds and our wills and our souls in order to protect and to fight for? What is this West? And that is the key question. That's the key question in his speech. But that's the key question in the civilizational struggle that we exist today. And I don't believe it's so much a class of civilization, because I think the real enemy to Western civilization is within the West, left and right. And I think Donald Trump is part of the problem. And the Atlantic magazine is part of the problem. They are part of the enemy of the West. They claim to be the defenders of the West, but they are the actual part of the enemy of the West. But he's right. These are fundamental issues. These are ideological issues. He kind of implies they're ideological. He doesn't really say it. He talks about, he says, today The ties that unite our civilization. Again, what is the civilization? Are no less vital in demand, no less defense than that bare shred of land on which the hope of Poland once totally rested. Our freedom, our civilization, and our survival depend on these bonds of history, culture, and memory. And today, as ever, Poland is in our hearts, and its people are in that fight. All right, Churchill-like. This could have been great speech, right? But what do we mean by civilization? What do we mean by the West? What is the threat? Clearly, Islam is the threat, or jihad is the threat. But is that the only threat? Someone he implies maybe Russia's a threat. But are those the existential threats that are destroying the West? Is immigration a threat? What kind of immigration? Doesn't really say. And what is the solution? Is the solution family? Is the solution tradition? Is the solution faith? Now, if you read this, your impression is that Donald Trump associates with the West Christianity, or if you want to be broader, the Judeo-Christian tradition. He associates with the West everything affiliated with that, related to the idea of family values, the idea of tradition and the importance of tradition. And that to him, and the importance of borders, the importance of nationalism, the importance of defining borders and protecting borders and keeping, to him, that nationalistic, religious, tradition-based, that to him is what Western civilization is about. And if you go back and read Steve Bannon, if you go back to his speeches, to his commentary, this is like the Steve Bannon vision of American nationalism. His vision was always around Judeo-Christian tradition. It was always around borders as really, really important, and restriction on trade and restrictions on immigration as part of all that. Tradition. Steve Bannon is very much a Catholic. Is probably the most extensive speech I've seen of his was given at a Vatican gathering. Right. So faith, the importance of faith, the importance of tradition. You know, this speech, I'm not surprised that the Wall Street Journal loved it. I'm not surprised that it was embraced by kind of the religious right, or if it wasn't, it should be embraced by the religious right. Let me find the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal was here somewhere. The Wall Street Journal loved this speech because of all those things. Oh, maybe I don't have it. Where is it? All right, I'm not as organized as I usually am because of all the technical stuff and because I didn't have a lot of time today. But so the Wall Street Journal loved the speech, and they thought it was visionary. They thought finally here was a defining moment for the Trump presidency. He was projecting a vision. He was defending Western values. He was defending faith. He was defending the nation. He was defending borders. He was defending this nationalistic, faith-based, tradition-based vision of America that so many on the right, that so many religious conservatives have. And this is what the, somewhat what elements within the alt-right, the alternative right love. This is the kind of the paleo-conservatism of Pat Buchanan. All of that is reflected right here in this speech. Now, what is the left's response? This was fascinating. And I think the most interesting, there were a couple of responses, but one which I thought was particularly interesting was Peter Bernhardt in the Atlantic. And he called this the racial and religious paranoia of Trump's Warsaw speech. Now, the modern left can only think, it seems, at least certainly the radical left, but the modern left only thinks in terms of race and groups and geography, and it thinks in tribes. It thinks in tribes. It thinks about their tribes and our tribes. And Peter basically says, look, there is no such thing as Western civilization. What's this thing about the West? The West is now really in the West. Poland used to be in Eastern Europe. Now it's considered West. Where is this West? Where are these borders? Is Morocco part of the West? It's not about, he says, it's not about political system, because Japan is not a Western country, yet it's a free country. It's a democratic country or constitutional country. He says this whole idea of having the term Western civilization is basically a racist term. It basically means, he says, it means white and Christian. That's it. And maybe judo Christian if they're generous on that day. But the fundamental, he says, the way in which the right defines the Western civilization is all about white and Christian. And that's how he thinks about it. And the fact is that, to some extent, the way Trump is talking about this, he feeds right into this criticism. Because suddenly the Christian part is very much here. Suddenly the Christian part is very much segregating the West based on religion. And he keeps returning to religion and tradition, family values, all the things that are associated with Christianity. And you could even argue that there are hints of the racial element, although, again, I don't think Trump is a racist. I suspect that Stephen Miller is not quite a racist, but a borderline, or at least sympathetic to the idea of there's something unique about being white, and there's something unique about white nationalism and so on. I suspect there's something of that. Certainly in Bannon there is, and I suspect there's a little bit of that in Stephen Miller. Not explicit kind of, they're inferior, we're superior. But, I hear it when I travel around the country. I hear people talking about, we don't need those brown people in this country. We don't need those brown people crossing the border. We don't need those brown people taking our jobs. Brown people, really? Really? You're defining people based on the color of their skin and this dismissive, ridiculous... I mean, there is an element, a strong element in this kind of approach. I'm not accusing Donald Trump of being a racist, but I am accusing Donald Trump, and I think the left is right, in Donald Trump suggesting or legitimizing or not undermining kind of a racist agenda that exists on the right and exists on the right everywhere. Right? And, it's just enough that rational people could listen to Donald Trump and hear race and religion. And I'm sure his fans, I'm sure the alt-right fans, love this speech and latched onto this speech and saw this speech as an affirmation of race and religion as defining Western civilization. And this is what the left sees in. And they say, wait a minute, the West is a racial and religious term. That's what Peter Beinhart says. This is what the President of the United States is projecting. And he's horrified by the whole idea that, that there is such a thing as a unique civilization. He's horrified by the idea that there is anything special about the West. He does point out, though, and I think legitimately, that Donald Trump doesn't talk about ideas at all. He doesn't define the West in terms of ideas. He's defining the West in terms of religion, and suspiciously in terms of potentially, not explicitly, but implicitly for some years, in terms of race. And then he says, this is amazing to me, he says the most shocking sentence in Trump's speech, perhaps, listen to this, perhaps the most shocking sentence in any presidential speech delivered on foreign soil in my lifetime was his claim that, quote, the fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. Now, he says, on its face, that's absurd. Jihadist terrorists can kill people in the West, but unlike Nazi Germany or Soviet Union, they cannot topple even the weakest European government. Jihadists control no great armies. I agree with that. I think they can topple governments long term, but only because the European governments will let themselves be toppled. But I agree with him. I don't think jihad is a real threat, existential threat to the West. And I don't think jihad is the context in which the fundamental question about time is whether the West has the will to survive. We'll get to what I think it is. Their ideologies have limited appeal, he writes, even among the Muslims. They target their own propaganda. ISIS has all but lost Mosul and soon will lose Raqqa later this year, which is all true. I mean, these are pathetic enemies. If we really think that the Muslims are going to take over the West, destroy us, give me a break. Give me a break. We could wipe them out in seconds. They are not a threat. We can discuss what the real threat is, but you know. All right. And he talks about look, where is he giving this talk? He's giving a talk in Poland. Poland, which is ethnically homogeneous, white. Poland, which is very religious, Catholic. Poland, which has a government right now which is trying to silence opposition, which is opposed really to free speech, which is it's moving towards an authoritarian, nationalist Poland, very nationalistic. This government right now is a nationalistic, leaning authoritarian kind of government. And this is where Trump is giving the speech. So that's part of the explanation for why you can interpret what Trump is saying in terms of nationalism, religion, and even race. And I think if you just examine Trump's speech, and if you say that Trump represents the only vision for what Western civilization is, then Peter is horrified by the idea that we have Western civilization. He thinks it's an illegitimate term because, wait a minute, we shouldn't be segregating and identifying ourselves based on race and religion. Of course, that's exactly what the left does all the time, and it's exactly what the left sees everywhere all the time. It's the only way they can think about the world. So it's kind of funny coming from the left that they, it's always, I find it always kind of entertaining when the left gets all upset about racism when they are so racist themselves. And where their whole frame of reference today, particularly kind of the radical elements, not the radical elements, the wacky elements of the left, the progressives, the whatever they call themselves. I hate using those terms because progressive is a nice word. They are so, fundamentally leftist, so fundamentally racist that it's kind of horrifying. But he raises the question, is there such a thing as Western civilization? Is there such a thing? Is it legitimate to say that the West survival is at risk, that the West is dying, that it's a question of whether we can defend the West or not, and that the West needs defending, right? So that was one critique. There was another critique also, same lines, James Fallows, also in The Atlantic, where he compares the language of this speech to the language of previous presidents. And he makes some interesting observations. And one of the observations is that much of the previous presidents, when they gave speeches talking about these kind of issues, they often framed values as universal values, not Western values. They often, particularly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when the idea was Western values were winning. So, and at that point, the idea was values are universal. Today, there's this idea that the Western values are not winning, that they're losing. Russia has not embraced them, that the Islamic world has not embraced them. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was this idea that Western values were spreading all over the world and were winning. But there was also this general tone of this general idea of talking about ideas and not about kind of Western civilization and focusing in on faith, tradition, family, but talking about universal values and universal ideas that represented the West in the past. And Fallows talks about and analyzes that. and compares it, and I think does an interesting job. He also brings out a point which I kind of noticed but didn't really make explicit. The number of times that Donald Trump uses the term national will, and will, does the West have the will to survive? And then in the end where he says, what does he say in the end? It begins with our minds, our wills, and our souls. And, you know, if you don't know any history and you don't have a broader context and you don't know how will was used by Nietzsche, but more importantly by the Nazis and by nationalists generally, it doesn't seem that important. And will is kind of your can be a positive term in the right context, but it is a little suspect, given Bannon writing the speech, that will finds itself suggested so many times. I mean, those of you might know the reference to the triumph of the will, which was a Leni, I can't pronounce her name, Riefenstahl's movie, famous movie, brilliant movie, beautifully made, but that upheld Nazism, that upheld the Aryan race, the triumph of pure will, the emotion, the spirit, the whim, which is kind of the Nietzschean view of will overcoming reason, overpowering reason, and that the Übermensch, the great man, the Superman, is not driven by reason, but is driven by this overwhelming emotion, by this power of sheer pure willpower, will to do, will to create, or really will to destroy. And the fact that will is repeatedly in here, right? That is interesting. It's interesting, the connection to the way it's used in Nietzsche and the way it was used by the Nazis. You know, Stephen Miller knows that's the sense in which will, but I think they're truly trying to resurrect. I don't think Trump has a clue, but I think these people behind the scenes are trying to resurrect this nationalistic notion of will, of national will, of striving, of national goals, of a real nationalism that is supposed to achieve something. So, you know, I can see why the left is worried. And I think we should be worried. Because if the vision of Western civilization is faith, tradition, nationalism, the will of the people, and the victory of will over everything, then we are tilting towards authoritarianism and fascism and all the bad history that has existed in the West. I don't think it's Western civilization, but existed in the West. That is the real enemy. That is the real enemy. Okay, so let's step back because, and a writer, let me find the name of the writer. And you can find, by the way, transcripts of the speech. There are plenty of transcripts of the speech. I think it's worth reading. It's really interesting. By the way, other publication like Vox, the title of their piece is Trump's speech in Poland sounded like an alt-right manifesto. And the quote they pull out for the headline is, "For family, for freedom, for country, and for God." Now, I don't know if Trump actually says that, but you could pull each one of those elements and make it. But yes, that's how Trump defined Western civilization in a speech. Family, freedom, I don't know that he mentioned freedom that often. Country and God, nationalism, religion, tradition, and family. That's Western civilization. And this writer who typically writes for the, there it is. Typically writes for the National Review, a publication I do not like. You can ask me sometimes why, if it's not obvious. Daniel Foster wrote also a piece in Atlantic. This is, by the way, why I like reading the Atlantic, and I recommend that if you're interested in ideas, if you're interested in what's happening in the culture of this country, you should read the Atlantic. If you read the leftist pieces, you will get a sense of what the left is thinking. If you read people like Daniel Foster and other people on the right, you will get a sense of the right. This is the relatively sane left and relatively sane right engaged in a real debate and a real discussion in Atlantic Magazine. So I think it's well articulated. The articles are there. You get various positions, and these are good writers. So I recommend reading people like James Fallows, and people like Peter Beinart, because then you get a sense of what the relatively sane left is thinking. You only imagine what the nutty left is thinking. And then if you read people like Daniel Foster, you read what the sane right is thinking, the better right is thinking. Now, I'm not, as I've said many times on the show, I'm not left or right. I'm a radical for capitalism. I'm an objectivist. I'm an individualist. And we'll see that neither Trump nor these leftists are that. They're all collectivists. Daniel Foster seems from this article better, although he never quite defines his terms as well as I'd like him to. But what Foster really is arguing, and I recommend you read his piece. It's called In Defense of the West. He's really criticizing Peter Beinart's and others on the left's criticism of Trump's speech. He's not defending Trump's speech, which I give him credit for. What he's doing is attacking their way of attacking Trump's speech. He's basically saying what you're doing is you're attacking the concept of Western civilization, and that is just plain wrong. That doesn't make any sense. There is such a thing as the West. Now, maybe it's true that Donald Trump has not articulated very well what is that West. Maybe it's true that his speech didn't articulate it well. But you can't throw out the whole concept of the West. And he actually makes fun of Peter Beinart's kind of pseudo attempts to kind of say, well, Western civilization is not really in the West. Because he says, look, to the extent that Japan is governed by a constitution written for it by General MacArthur, crammed down its throat by General MacArthur, which has clear reflections or clear portions of it taken straight out of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, to the extent that the West has embraced elements of Western governance, of kind of constitutional governance, basic protections of individual rights, and so on, to the extent that they have elements of free markets. To that extent, Japan is a Western country. And the idea that Japan is not part of Western civilization today is ludicrous. Of course it is. I would even say that the elements that are successful in China are elements of Western civilization. And he goes into the history, and he goes into, well, even Egypt had elements of the West in its past, and certainly Morocco has been influenced by the West and is a mixed. So you can't. It's not about geography. It's about ideas. It's about ideas. So, unfortunately, nobody really talks about what those ideas are. Foster, briefly touches on them, but doesn't really go in depth, and partially, I think, because he doesn't really know what they are. I don't think anybody out there really knows what the ideas are in terms of what really defines Western civilization. To know that is to understand the Enlightenment, and to understand, because I think it's the Enlightenment that defines Western civilization. I like the fact that Foster goes back to Greece, because in many respects, it's the Enlightenment's application of Greek ideas and their modernization, if you will, bringing into the context of modern society together with the scientific revolution that really defines what we today mean or should mean by Western civilization. I have said in the past, and I believe, that Western civilization is two fundamental ideas. I mean, there's a lot behind these ideas, but two fundamental ideas, I think, define the Enlightenment and therefore define Western civilization. One is the efficacy of reason and the rejection of revelation as a source of human knowledge. The idea that reason is our means of knowledge, and science is our way of learning about the world. That's an application of reason. And the importance and significance and centrality of life of the idea of science. Now, again, all this goes back to the Greeks. All this goes back basically to Aristotle and other Greek philosophers, primarily to Aristotle. But it is made Western in the modern sense. It's brought into the world that we know today by Isaac Newton, by John Locke, by Spinoza, by the rest of the Enlightenment thinkers, both in Scotland and in France and in other places in Europe. So it's reason. And because of the discovery of reason, go hand in hand with reason. I think in any era that is an era guided by reason is also an era of individualism. So it's these two ideas: the primacy, the idea that the individual is an end in itself, is of value, right? And that politically the individual has unalienable rights, that his life is sacred, that his life is his to live as he sees fits in order to be able to pursue the rational values necessary for his own existence, for his own life. That idea of your life doesn't belong to the clan, to the tribe, to the king, to the pope, to God even, but your life is yours to live based on your reasoning mind. That combination of reason and individualism, that is what defines Western civilization. And its roots are deeply, deeply, deeply in Greece. And to that extent, Foster identifies it right. And he identifies the roots in Greece. And he says, he even gives credit to the Arabs, which I always do. And I know there are people out there who've written revisionist histories who write out the Arabs from the history of Western civilization. But that is a massive mistake, because it is the Arabs, it is the Muslims who preserved the ideas of Western civilization during the darkest of eras in the West. It is the Muslims in the libraries of Baghdad and ultimately in the libraries in Spain who preserved the writings of Aristotle, the great plays, and as Foster says, it was the library in Alexandria for decades that preserved the great writings of Western civilization, of the Greeks, of the roots, the foundations of Western civilization. So the left pretends that Western civilization is some geography because they want to accuse the other side of racism. And the other side plays into their hands because people like Donald Trump and Stephen Miller and our good friend Stephen Bannon cannot define Western civilization and can't place it in Greece because they don't want to place it in Greece. They want to place it in Jerusalem, which is also not exactly West, but they want to place it with Christianity. They want to place it with a pope in Rome. That's how they define Western civilization. And they do, whether they fully admit it, whether they're fully conscious of it, they do want to place it with a particular race. It's white Christians. Now, they're somewhat tolerant. They're somewhat tolerant of us Jews, but only a little bit. Only a little bit. Because they keep sticking to Judeo-Christian tradition. I think that's to make clear that they're not anti-Semites, but I don't know to what extent that's real or not. All right, so I think Trump's speech is awful because it places the locus of Western civilization, just as the left has recognized, on religion and on geography and on, to some extent, race. Although I think that's overplayed by the left, but it's there, it's hinted at. But I think the left is wrong in throwing out the baby with the bathwater, if you will. It doesn't seem right because the concepts here are so huge. I can't think of baby and bathwater with these concepts. But they're throwing out the concept of Western civilization in an attempt to reject Donald Trump's speech. And to save Western civilization, one has to know what Western civilization is. And one has to know who the threat is coming from. So in my view, the threat is not Islam. Islamists, jihadists, Islamic totalitarians, yeah, they're a pest. Those Muslim immigrants into Europe, they're nothing more than a pest. The real threat is right here. The real threat to Western civilization is Donald Trump. The real threat to Western civilization is the leftist writers in the Atlantic. The real threat is collectivism and mysticism. The real threat is those who would negate reason and replace it with tradition and mysticism and faith and religion. And the real threat is those who would replace individualism with collectivism. Yes, you have to deal with Islam, but that's easy. That's easy. We could wipe out ISIS. Listen to my show from a few days ago that I did on the Blaze. I described it. You could wipe ISIS in 2 weeks. They'd be gone. They'd be finished. You could wipe out Iran. You could take care of Saudi Arabia. But that's the point. You can't even conceptualize of the way in which Islam is a threat to us, because it's collectivistic, because it's mystical, because it's tradition bound, because it adheres to violence and doesn't recognize the separation of church and state. You can't recognize those unless you know what the West is about. So you can go to Saudi Arabia and pretend they're our friend, like Donald Trump did. Right? And he's going to get them to help reduce terrorism. They are the terrorists. They fund terrorism every day. They preach terrorism from their mosques every Friday. All those Gulf states are in it. They use the money that they have to create mosques and build madrasas, schools all over the world to promote anti-Western civilization. That's the enemy, but that's the enemy they can deal with easily. That's the one that's easy to deal with. The real enemies are university professors. The real enemy are these crazy people rioting in the streets, burning down civilization inside the West. The real enemy is the people who think that the answer to those people is religion, or the answer to these people is race, or the answer to these people is nationalism, is building walls, is restricting trade. That's the enemy. The enemy is today's left and today's right. The enemy is mysticism and collectivism. And the left is mystical and the right is mystical. The left is collectivist, the right is collectivist. And that leaves us pretty lonely. This goes back to the initial question I got from the caller. What's the chance of saving Western civilization? If you mean saving the idea of individualism and reason, then it's bleak. It's going to be hard. It's a war out there. It's a long war. It's an intellectual war. And Donald Trump and most of the modern rights are not our allies. And certainly the left is not our ally. So there's a huge battle. It's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. And it's going to take decades. And it has to start one mind at a time. And it won't be successful if we ally ourselves, something like that. You know what I mean? With the Donald Trumps of the world. I mean, yeah, some of the stuff he said was very good in the context of knowing what Western civilization is. But in the context of thinking of Western civilization as faith, tradition, nationalism, family, it's awful, 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 awful. Really, really, really bad. That is the enemy of Western civilization. All right, so to defend Western civilization, we need to defend egoism. We need to defend individual rights. We need to defend capitalism. We need to defend reason. Above all, we need to defend human reason. And we can succeed in that. Okay. Okay, let's see. So we've got a caller. We're going to take a caller. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Hi, this is Upteen Fuguzenda calling from Seattle, Washington.
Hey, Upteen, you've been patiently waiting. Thanks. What's up?
I have. So one thing I've been grappling with is trying to figure out why it is these ideas spread so readily and so fast and are so persuasive. So I have a friend who he used to be a run-of-the-mill conservative, and he's totally bought into the alt-right.
Yeah.
And there's this website, Vox Populi, Vox Day. He
Yep.
buys into these 16 points of the alt-right, where they define Western civilization as being founded on three foundational pillars: Christianity, the European nations, the Greco-Roman legacy. All these things which they're not a positive case, right? They're all so if you're not Christian, then you're bad and you're not Western civilization. If
Yep.
you're not from a European origin, you're bad and right.
Oh no,
They're
it's
not
horrible. It's
telling you
evil
why.
stuff.
Right.
It's
Right.
evil stuff. Yeah.
And it's bizarre because he doesn't even see the racism in one of the tenets of the alt right that's on the site, which is, we must secure the existence of white people and a future for white children.
Yep.
And he doesn't see the racism in it. And I try to articulate a positive case, right? I try to articulate a capitalist, objectivist case for what society should look like, and it just doesn't connect. And so I guess my question here is there something that's easier for a person to grasp about a concept that excludes rather than includes and makes a positive case? Like, is it easier to frame a discussion in terms of sports teams, where our team is better because they're not your team?
Yes,
even going back in history, are there examples like during the American Revolution? Was it really the case that the mass of Americans were pro-reason and individual rights, or were they really just anti-British?
Well, I think the answer is, and I don't know the answer exactly in terms of the revolution, but there's no question that during that period, the culture was better. The idea of isn't science wonderful and amazing, and isn't reason, whoa, because it was new and it was exciting and it was in the culture and it was everywhere. And the idea of freedom, I think those ideas were much more real to people then than in some respect, because it was in the culture, not because people were necessarily better. They were better educated to some extent, at least some of them. But it was the intellectual leaders, that's what they projected. And people respond to what the intellectual leadership projects. But I think you bring up a really fascinating point, and I've been thinking a lot about this. Why is collectivism so prevalent? Why is, and this goes to socialism, and it goes to a lot of these terms, why are they so prevalent? And I think it's because they're easy. They appeal to a perceptual level mentality. So let me flip that. I think individualism, understanding the role of reason, and really understanding individualism is a massive, massive achievement, conceptual achievement. And it took human beings, hundreds of years to get there, thousands of years, arguably, to get to that. It took them to get to Aristotle, and then they abandoned it because it was too hard. It was just too difficult to conceptualize it. And it's the lazy, if you think about what's lazy, what's easy, is to be at the perceptual level. It's just to open your eyes and look. And if you do that, if you don't think, if you're not constantly engaged with your own mind, then how do you discover truth? How do you know what's right or wrong? Well, what people tell you, what others are gonna say to you. But a perceptual mentality is a passive mentality. It's by definition a collectivistic mentality. It's also a zero-sum mentality, because you look around the world and when you see exchange, what you see is somebody giving up dollars and somebody getting something, and nothing's being created. To understand the win-win relationship in trade, you have to think. You have to exert effort. You have to actually, engage in conceptual thought. So people who are at the perceptual level, collectivism, zero-sum world, kind of the socialism, the altruism, it's in the culture, it's all around them, it's what everybody says and what we do, and to challenge that requires real effort, which is not what they do. Why they don't do it, that's a different question, but it's not what they do. They don't engage in it.
Right.
So
assuming that...
So it's the default.
That
it's
do,
unfortunately, it's the default.
Right.
So this is why it's so hard. So what you need is, fundamentally, and this is why people say we got to get them when they're young, and it's right, you got to get people thinking. You got to get people actually engaging their mind in thought rather than stuck on the perceptual level. And it might be that requires everybody to go to Montessori when they're young or something, although I didn't, but it requires people, it requires a massive effort in early education, but it's somehow we've got to get them to switch it on. If they don't switch it on consistently and thoroughly, there's no hope, because at the perceptual level we lose. That makes sense?
Right, but so that makes sense. I'm just curious if that's a realistic kind of goal. Like, is there an example in history where a majority of people have been able to turn that on?
Yeah, I mean, I think Greece is an example. Ancient Greece is an example. And I think the Enlightenment was an example. Now, whether there was a majority or not, it was the cultural dominant position, and that's all you need. So I think, how do you become the culturally dominant position in this? You have to capture the intellectual high ground, and to capture the intellectual high ground, you need a lot of thinkers articulating the point consistently, applying it to many fields, including the arts. I don't think it's an accident that art was big in the Enlightenment, and that art was big in Greece, and that art was big in the 19th century. Art aesthetics is an important way in which this integrates into the culture, but you need it at the intellectual high ground. If we can capture the intellectual high ground, then people will adapt. We will make it easier for them to think, and even those people who don't think will gravitate towards our ideas because they're the dominant ideas, and it's easiest, right? It's easier just to follow what's common. So that's a challenge. The challenge is to capture the intellectual high ground. And it's always a small group who does that. You don't need a majority, but you need a lot of people. It's a numbers. There's an element of a numbers game here. It can be 5 people. I can't do it by myself. It has to be a large group of intellectuals who are actively engaged with even a much larger group of people like you guys, who are supporting of those intellectuals, who are helping spread the word of those intellectuals, who don't have to be intellectuals themselves, but are providing the infrastructure and the support for those intellectuals and helping them spread. And that group of intellectuals has to be people in the arts, it has to be people in education, it has to be people in the sciences, it has to be people in a variety of different academic humanities fields. So it has to be a broad scope. It has to be writers and journalists, and it has to be a broad scope of people who are all advocating for reality, reason, individualism. If you get those 3 right, you're good. Consistently and in different places in different ways.
So assuming there's that hierarchy where you have the intellectuals leading the charge, at the lower levels where some people, I think many people who just aren't open to that kind of persuasion, is it legitimate or good, or is it self-destructive to start framing the discussion in terms of a team sport? So, saying being pro-Western means being pro-reason without really getting into what that means, and then just listing off all the things that are.
I think it's useful to view. I think the West is a good term if it's defined as here are the things that define it, reason and individualism, and explain that and so on. It might be an entry point to certain people. But let me get back to your friend, one other observation. In the culture we live in today, the alt-right is very appealing because we live in a culture that is collectivist, where the left has dominated the intellectual high ground and defined collectivism as the only really way to approach the world. And the left has really given us, it's all about race, and it's all about group, it's all about your tribe. And all the alt-right is doing is saying, okay, we accept that. Here's our tribe. And we live in a world in which, from we're very young, we are trained in altruism. So it's very easy for them to adopt kind of, I'm going to sacrifice for the nation. So collectivism and altruism always go hand in hand. And then it's also a world in which is basically Christian, where the Christian religion is very highly respected and very highly admired. And where there's this idea, for example, Prager has it, and you've heard Dennis Prager say it, and many others, that you can't have morality without religion. So religion is elevated. So it's very easy for somebody who's a typical conservative to say, oh, wait a minute, all this is a more consistent, more serious views of what I always held. So I was always for religion. Now I'm really for religion. I was always for America in a nationalistic sense. Now I'm really for America. And so the alt-right is just a logical progression from where conservatives always were, which is they always had an irrational foundation. They always based it way too much on faith, on tradition, and on nation. And now the alt-right is capitalizing on that. And of course, the left has partially allowed that by so emphasizing race over and over and over again, that all the alt-right is doing is saying, okay, we take you seriously, left.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense, but it's also terrifying.
It's very terrifying.
To hold these ideas more seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, this is when I, you know, let me find that section from Trump's speech. When he says, the main question is, do we have the will to fight? Or you know, the number one question that we face is you know, here, the fundamental question about time is whether the West has the will to survive. I think he's right. Right? Do we have the will to defend individualism and reason? And, you know, the right is abandoning individualism and reason. The left is abandoning whatever remnant of individualism and reason they had. It looks bleak. It looks very, very, very bleak, and it is depressing. So I'm with you on the depression side. But what alternative do we have but to fight? And we have the right ideas. We have great ideas. We have ideas that are actually powerful. And for the first time, Ayn Rand has given us a proper defense of reason and of individualism. And for the first time, we understand that at the core of the idea of fighting for individualism and fighting for capitalism and fighting for individual rights is a morality of egoism. And now we have a proper morality of egoism and a basis from which to fight. I think we have the best weapons in the world. It really is now a question of, and I would ask the objectivists out there, the people who are committed to this fight, do you have the will to fight? Do you want the West to survive? Do you want to survive? And if the answer is yes, then there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of work to be done. And part of that work involves supporting the intellectuals like me and others out there who are engaged day to day in hand-to-hand combat financially, but also it's about using your own voices and doing things that help promote these ideas in whatever capacity you can do them. So we're all in this fight, and yeah, if we have the will to survive and if we have the will to win, we will win. It's going to take a long time, and we have to, you know, hold that context that it'll take a long time. But you know, we have to fight. And I don't necessarily see the fight in people. I see too much resignation. Anyway, it is terrifying. I agree. And in that sense, I think that Trump's speech was the best speech he's given and the most terrifying speech that he's given, because it's the most explicitly Stephen Bannon speech that he's given in terms of him defining what he sees as the right. And it's, you know, if people thought there was some remnant of good here in this Trump administration, I don't see it. Now I do see, just to be optimistic, right? There's some good things about Trump, and it's not Trump. The good things about Trump is that he is appointing a lot of people. And I'm gonna take you offline. Thanks for the call. Really appreciate it. He's appointing a lot of people. I just heard a story on NPR on the way in about this. Appointing a lot of people into a lot of positions in government who are good people, who are basically anti-regulation, anti-big government, going to shrink regulation. And they can do a lot without Trump, and they can do a lot without. And the reason he's appointing them is not because he believes it. The reason he's appointing them is they're the people available. So there are people out there who work for think tanks or work at George Mason University who are really good on some of these issues. And somebody's rolling their eyes because I listen to NPR. I listen to NPR every single day. It's the best source of news out there. Now, they're biased, they're leftist, but they have the most interesting stories, the most detailed stories. You'll hear stuff on NPR you won't hear anywhere else. And if you're smart, you can adjust to where they're being biased and take that out, that factor out. So I wouldn't make fun of NPR. I don't know what your news source is, but I bet you it's 1,000 times less intellectual and intelligent than NPR is. So, for example, NPR had a story today about all these people, and this was actually in the New York Times, another one of those roll the eyes, right? The New York Times did an investigative report about who these Trump appointees are, who are in charge of these commissions in every government department that are responsible for deregulation. Now, that's fascinating. I didn't know that they'd appointed these commissions to deregulate in every one of these government agencies. And the New York Times is reporting about this. Now, they're critical about who's being appointed, but hey, that's what investigative journalism should be about, going in and finding out who these people are, their conflict of interest, and so on. and at least you get a reflection of what those are. But so I think because of the people he's appointed, there were a lot of what I would call good libertarians. There were a lot of better conservatives who are being appointed to these more junior positions all over the administration, who are going to do good things on a local, a micro level. Now, those are easy to overturn in the future administration, but the more they do, the harder it is. So that's the one positive I see in the Trump administration and in what they're actually doing. All right, we got one other call, and then we kind of run out of time, but we're going to take this call. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Hey, this is Al. How you doing?
Hey, Zach. Good. How about you?
Al.
Go ahead.
I'm doing good. I think one of the biggest problems is, and I see this both on the left and right, is nobody actually reads the source material for their philosophies. I got family and friends on the right who are religious, never cracked open the Bible.
That's pretty funny.
Swear up and down that it's absolutely 100% true. We should live by these morals over here. And then we got the people on the left who are, to one degree, socialists. They've never read anything by Marx or any of these other socialist leftist philosophers. And so they have no clue as to what it is they're actually supporting. But you can't change their minds because they feel that this is right, even though they have no clue what it is they're supporting.
These people are not thinkers. They're going by emotion. They've been told by their professors or by their preachers. They find it appealing emotionally. They are whim and perception level based. And I would, and it's hard to get to those people because reason is not their tool. But look, there are intellectuals who read those books, and they're the enemy. They're the real enemy. The people who are just going by whim, the first thing is to get them to think. And then if you can get them to think and read, then you can change their minds. The real challenge is those people who read Marx, who've read Foucault, who've read Foucault, whatever his name is, who read all the modern postmodernists and are excited about it, and who then go and teach it, and who then or read the Bible and then preach it and are adamant about its truth. Those are the dangerous people. The people who haven't read it, it's sad because they're so driven by emotions rather than by ideas. But at least there's an opening. It's the intellectuals who read the books that really scare me, right? And you have to ask.
Well, I don't really see.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't really see a lot of opening in there because of the fact that they're so set in their emotional content that they refuse to listen. They get hostile. Now people who I'm an atheist and they're religious, they're like, oh, well, why are you so mad at God? It's like, I'm not mad at something that doesn't exist. You know?
It's hard to be mad at something that doesn't exist. He might be mad at me, although he doesn't exist, so he wouldn't be that. But anyway, no, I think you're right. I think it's very hard, and I try to avoid interacting with people who are emotionalists like that, and I try to look for the people who are still searching, for the people who have questions, for the people who are not sure, for the people who might be on the left or might be on the right, but are still open to other ideas. And I think those are typically young people. Those are typically in their late teens, early 20s. And some adults, you find them in the business world. You find them post-college where they used to be leftists, but now they're living in the real world, and that ideology doesn't fit quite well. So there's a lot of people out there that don't quite fit that mold of being pure emotionalist, we can still reach, and those are the people we have to go after. I mean, you find it in the kind of one of the things I love about Dave Rubin is you find it in Dave Rubin's audience, because it's a generally reason respecting, mistaken and confused, right? And our job is, given that they're reason based, to give them good ideas and hope they gravitate in our direction. But that's who we have to go after. There's no other choice. I mean, yes, the people who are driven by emotion, who don't even read the books, are not interested in ideas, not interested in arguments. If they're not interested in logic, drop them. There's nothing to talk about. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Great. Thanks for the call. All right. So in conclusion, we should all be very depressed. No, I mean, the conclusion is you have to know what you're fighting for. And I'm a big believer in Western civilization. I'm a big believer in the fight for Western civilization. But I don't get caught up in all excited when Donald Trump talks about Western civilization, because he doesn't mean the same thing I do. I don't get too excited about, I get excited about the fundamental ideas, about the ideas that are driving civilization, about what civilization is. I also don't think, and this is counter to many of the people who listen to the show, I think we need to get our minds right. Islam, the jihadis, they're not the threat. We are. The threat is among us. The threat is those professors at the university. The threat is the alt-right. The threat is the growing nationalism and authoritarianism in Europe and in the United States. The threat is Americans and Europeans turning their backs on Western civilization, as they did when they adopted communism. Communism is an anti-Western civilization ideology, as they did when they adopted Nazism and fascism. Nazism and fascism are anti-Western ideology. And as they do when they cling to their religion, when they cling to their Bibles, because the Bible, Christianity, is an anti-Western philosophy or primitive philosophy. Right? Now, it has elements. There's an element of individualism in Christianity which kind of saves it. So what we have to do is emphasize the true roots of Western civilization. And what more fun can one have in life than to fight for reality, to fight for reason? Reason is efficacious. Reason is knowing reality, is identifying, is awareness of reality as it is. How much more fun can you get than fighting for your own life, for egoism, for rational, long-term self-interest, your own, and therefore for individual rights and the system of capitalism and freedom? Hey, we've got to be optimistic here. We're in a fight for, and we have as our foundation, as our basis, the greatest ideas in human history, and we understand them, and nobody else does. And let's go teach them. Teach them, not preach them, not cram them down people's throats. Teach them. So this should be fun, guys. I'm looking forward to it every day. You guys should look forward to it. And with that comes an end to another almost 2 hours of the Yaron Brook Show. Just to remind you, every Sunday we got 2 hours on The Blaze. You can hear it on theblaze.com/radio and live. You can also download all the episodes and sound bites and everything from, where was it? From SoundCloud. Just put in Yaron Brook Show on SoundCloud. You can also get it on Blog Talk Radio. You can also get it on YouTube. You can also get it on Facebook. So all my shows are now on all platforms. Every single show I've ever done is now on YouTube. Many of them on Facebook, all of them on Blog Talk Radio, and the Blaze ones are all on SoundCloud. All of the shows are also, all of them, including the Blaze ones, are all on iTunes and on Stitcher and on every podcasting app known to man. So you have no reason not to listen to the show and not to arm yourself with intellectual ammunition to go out and continue with this fight. But more importantly, arm yourself with intellectual ammunition to live a better life for yourself and to prosper and be successful as a human being. Finally, I hope the experiment of doing this on all these platforms worked. Let me know if you liked it. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and Blog Talk Radio, SoundCloud, and everything else. I know I'm giving you a lot of homework. And this is the most important thing if you want to help. If you want to help the show, if you want to help these ideas, if you want to get them out there, if you value this show as a promoter of these ideas, share. All the liking, all the loving, all the emoji, all the thumbs up, all the stuff is nice. It's satisfying emotionally. It doesn't do one iota to actually getting this show a bigger audience. It doesn't do one iota to actually increasing the scale of listenership. The only thing that really matters and the only metric that people really look at, they go a bunch of hearts, is sharing. Share it on Periscope, share it on YouTube, share it on Facebook, share it on Blog Talk, share it on Twitter. Everywhere. You got to share, guys. I mean, this is Yaron Brook, who always argues against sharing, right? You shouldn't teach your kids to share. But in this case, sharing is a trade. So this is the trader principle in action. And social media has just screwed everything up for me. So now I have to advocate for sharing. Okay, on that ridiculous note, I will see you all, talk to you all. Hopefully you'll all be listening on Sunday to my show on The Blaze at 11 o'clock Pacific time. Talk to you then. Bye.